three things that our African leaders needs to begin focusing on now, or at least become more intentional about pursuing, is number one, our African leaders need to be more intentional in removing the colonial borders. It does not make sense that as Africans, we cannot freely travel in the African continent. It does not make sense that I have to pay for a visa to go to an African country, go to a country where the people actually speak the same dialect that I speak, and I still have to get a visa just like I'm going outside there, and then I have to go through custom just like I'm going outside there. In some of our African countries, it is more easier for a non-African coming out from the West to cross and enter in our country than for an African in the African soil to cross over and come to our country. That needs to change. We cannot continue living this enslaved life, being controlled by something that was done over 200 years ago by powers whose interest was not ours but theirs. So the first thing I would say is, number one, our leaders need to remove the colonial borders. Number two, and so that we have free movement. Number two, so of course with the open borders, we get rid of the visas and all of those things. But number two is we then work on economic integration, make it easy for us as Africans to be able to do trade with ourselves and among ourselves. Because what we produce in Africa is more than enough, not only to survive and solve the problem of hunger and all of these challenges in Africa, but actually to be able to thrive. But why is it not enough? Is because for the most part the bureaucratic system and the policies make it impossible for us to be able to do business, easily to sell and buy things made by our fellow Africans. And of course, something that also needs to change is our own mindset, where we don't believe in our own produced materials. And unfortunately, we have been brainwashed to think that anything that comes from abroad is better than anything that is produced from Africa, even though for the most part, everything produced in Africa, not for the most part, I would probably at least make a big suggestive statement that all at least are not from recycled material, they are from actual fresh raw material. And for the most part, you don't get that in the West. A lot of the things that are produced and sold are recycled materials. And then a lot of the things that sometimes get sent to Africa, sent just for dumping. You notice that certain things that are produced and then you find sometimes it's labeled this for export only. So that means whoever made it did not make it for their own consumption. They don't want to consume it. Why? But also sometimes you notice, I've seen these levels before, for export to Africa only, for African continent only. Okay, why is it made for Africa only? Why is it for the continent only? We don't ask that, but we get excited because it's from abroad. We don't believe in ourselves that we can produce something good. We don't buy things made by our own people within our own countries. We'd rather buy something that is junk, even if it's going to get destroyed and spoiled and stop functioning the next few days, a week later. We don't mind. We want to buy from abroad. And unfortunately, because of that, as Africans, we are producing what we don't consume. And we are consuming what we don't produce. So we're constantly producing, and so, but we don't consume what we produce. So who consumes it? Well, now we have to try and find a market for it. And now we can't do market business with ourselves because we really don't believe in our own production. And so it's wasted, or we try to sell it outside there at a loss because we don't then set the price in the global market, they do. And then we spend a lot more in trying to buy something else from out, which is of less quality than the one we just rejected. Our mindset needs to change. We need to begin believing in ourselves. So I'd say that I was going to give three. Number one, I say we need to remove the colonial borders. And number two, work on economic integration, right? And lastly, our leaders need to work on having one currency for the continent. It does not make sense that as a continent, 54 states, we have over 33 different currencies, and none of our currencies on the continent is any good in the global market. That we have to convert all of our currencies to be able to either to dollars, to euros, or pound to be able to compete in the global market, and that the value of our currency is not even set by us. It's set by the powers in the West, that the value of our currency is equated against the value of the dollars or the euros or the pounds. But also, notice, let me give an example. As a Ugandan, when I moved from Uganda to Kenya, I can't use my Ugandan shillings in Kenya. So at custom, I have to exchange my Ugandan shillings to Kenyan shillings, right? So I come and stay. So if I was crossing from Kenya to Tanzania, by the time I get to custom, I cannot use Kenyan shillings freely in Tanzania. So now I'll have to change the Kenyan shillings that I got to Tanzanian shillings. We're still within East Africa. Now, if moving from there decided to pass from Tanzania and go to Burundi or Rwanda, so I would have to, from the other side of the border, convert the Tanzanian shillings to Rwandan franc, still East African country. And then from there, from Rwanda, I'm crossing to Congo, still an East African country. I have to change the Rwandan franc to the Mafaranga in Congo. And just to look at the loss in the value in the currency, the kind of loss I will have made. And this is within East Africa. And all of these countries are part of East African community. Not to mention, if I was to try and get from there and go to Zambia and go to Zimbabwe and go to Nigeria or Ghana or Togo or Eswatini and maybe all of those things. But you notice that the hardship and all of that, it doesn't make sense that we are here and as Africans we have to deal with this. There's places in our own countries that I cannot go and pay using my Ugandan shillings. Hotels and restaurants that I cannot just go to get accommodation and pay in Ugandan shillings. I have to first get my Ugandan shillings and then go and convert it to dollars, buy dollars, so I can pay and spend a night in a hotel in my own country. That I have to go and buy dollars to be able to eat in a restaurant, some restaurant in my own country or within East African country, for example. How can it be? That needs to change. So those are the three things. Remove the colonial borders so that there's free movement. Work on economic integration, and we begin by doing trade among ourselves, and then with it we have a united voice, strong voice, so we can have a strong influence and a good bargain in the global market. And number three, let's work on one currency so that across the entire Africa we will use one currency. Wherever you are, it is the same, like it is with euros. When you have euros anywhere, as long as you're within the European Union and Schengen territory, that's what you'll use. You don't need to keep changing currency after currency and after currency when you're in Europe. You don't need to change dollars in different states in the United States. It's the same. Why can't we do it in Africa? I definitely believe it is possible. Those are the three things that I would say our leaders should begin working on. Of course, there are issues of corruption and things like that that our leaders need to really be intentional about. But the three, at this point, I'm not going to talk about corruption, even though we should address, and hopefully I can talk about it at a later time. But for now, those are the three things I would suggest that our leaders need to focus on.